A young waiter defends a disabled woman from public humiliation. But the next day, the man at the next table returns with an offer he simply can't refuse. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Jake Collins furiously scrubbed at the coffee stain spreading across his white shirt, mentally calculating how many extra shifts he'd need to cover the latest medical school bill that had arrived that morning. The envelope sat on his kitchen counter, unopened but threatening, the university logo, a silent reminder of dreams slipping further from reach. He'd already fallen behind on 2 payments. $632, he muttered, giving up on the stain. The shirt was ruined anyway, but it was his only clean uniform one. His mother's coughing from the next room intensified, pulling his attention away from his own problems. "Mom, did you take the blue pills this morning?" Jake called out, moving quickly to the small bedroom. Catherine Collins sat propped against several pillows, her once vibrant face now gaunt beneath prematurely gray hair. "I'm fine, honey, just the usual." She smiled weakly, her eyes finding the stain on his shirt. "Oh, Jake, your uniform." "It's nothing," he said, carefully counting out her medication on the bedside table. $37 left from his last paycheck. The prescription refill would cost $52. Another impossible math problem. He adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, attempting to look presentable despite the stain. The reflection showed the toll of too many double shifts, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slightly stooped from exhaustion. 26 years old and already worn down. 3 years of medical school completed, 2 more to go if he could somehow keep afloat financially. "I'll be back after closing. Mrs. Diaz next door has her phone if you need anything," he said, kissing his mother's forehead. "Jake," she caught his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You don't have to keep doing this. Your father would understand if you—" "Dad wanted me to be a doctor," he cut her off gently. "And I want it too. We're not having this conversation again." The mid-autumn air felt crisp against his face as he hurried toward the bus stop. La Maison Belle was across town, a 30-minute commute to a world entirely different from his neighborhood of discount stores and check-cashing businesses. The restaurant's gleaming glass doors reflected Jake's image as he approached, giving him one last chance to straighten his tie and smooth down his hair. He'd barely made it through the staff entrance when a familiar, irritated voice barked his name. "Collins, you're 4 minutes late. Again." Richard Mercer, the floor manager, checked his watch with exaggerated precision. "Sorry, sir. The bus was—" "Save it. I've got 10 people who'd kill for your position." Mercer's eyes narrowed at the stain. "And what happened to your shirt? This is La Maison Belle, not some greasy spoon." "It won't happen again." "It better not. Table 7 has already complained about waiting. Get moving." Jake slipped through the kitchen, nodding greetings to the line cooks who responded with sympathetic glances. In 3 years, he'd never been late until his mother's condition worsened last month. Now, between hospital visits and medication runs, punctuality had become another luxury he couldn't afford. The dining room hummed with the pleasant conversation of people who never worried about bus schedules or medical bills. Crystal glasses caught the light from elaborate chandeliers. Silverware gleamed on crisp white tablecloths. Jake moved between tables with practiced efficiency, pouring water, reciting specials, memorizing complex orders without writing them down. Then she walked in. Emma Wilson always arrived at 7:15 on Thursday evenings, always alone, always requesting the same corner table. She navigated between tables with careful measured steps, her right leg moving with a slight stiffness that betrayed her partial paralysis. Jake watched discreetly as Mike, the maitre d', led her to her usual spot. At 20-something, Emma was striking rather than conventionally beautiful. Intelligent eyes, a determined set to her jaw, and a dignity in how she handled her physical limitations that Jake had admired from a distance for months. She never asked for help, but accepted it graciously when offered. and she always left generous tips despite clearly not being wealthy. "Your regular customers here," Mike whispered, passing Jake in the service area. "And heads up, Mr. Montgomery just got seated in the section next to hers. VIP treatment required." Jake glanced toward the indicated table where a man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit sat studying the wine list. Gerald Montgomery was known among the staff for two things: tips that could make your week and complaints that could end your employment. "Got it. Thanks, Mike." Jake's phone vibrated in his pocket, unusual during a shift. He quickly checked it in the service corridor. His mother calling. She never called during his work hours, never. "Mom, what's wrong?" he whispered, turning away from passing servers. "The insurance denied the new medication, Jake." Her voice sounded thin, tired. "They're saying it's experimental. The copay would be $800. Jake closed his eyes, leaning against the wall. "We'll figure it out. I'll talk to them tomorrow." "I'm sorry, honey. I tried not to bother you at work." "It's okay. Take your regular meds and I'll sort this out later. Love you." He ended the call, took a deep breath, and re-entered the dining room with a professional smile firmly in place. For the next hour, Jake moved seamlessly between tables, refilling glasses, delivering elaborate dishes, and predicting needs before customers voiced them. He strategically positioned himself near Emma's table as she struggled, slightly with cutting her entree, ready to offer assistance if needed, but respecting her preference for independence. Gerald Montgomery demanded attention in a different way, sending back his wine after a single sip and interrogating Jake about the provenance of every ingredient in his meal. Jake answered each question with the deferential patience that good tips required. "And the lamb, is it truly New Zealand, or is that what they tell the customers?" Montgomery asked, settling back in his chair with a slightly condescending smile. "New Zealand, sir. Our chef insists on it. He's quite particular about sourcing." As he should be, at these prices. Jake noticed Montgomery's gaze shifting to Emma as she carefully maneuvered her fork to her mouth. A slight frown crossed the man's face, followed by a look of distaste that made Jake's shoulders tense. "Is everything to your satisfaction?" Jake asked Emma, deliberately positioning himself between her table and Montgomery's line of sight. "Everything's wonderful, thank you," she replied with a small smile. As Jake moved away to attend another table, he heard Montgomery's voice rise slightly, clearly intended to carry. "It's distracting, isn't it? When people who can't handle basic tasks insist on dining in establishments like this." Jake froze mid-step, hoping he'd misheard. "I mean, there's delivery service for a reason," Montgomery continued, addressing his dining companion but projecting his voice. "Some people should consider the comfort of others rather than making spectacles of themselves." A heavy silence fell over the nearby tables. Jake turned slowly to see Emma's face flush deep red, her eyes fixed on her plate as she struggled to maintain composure. The slight tremor in her hand made the knife slip against the plate with a jarring scrape. Something hot and urgent surged through Jake's chest. Without conscious decision, he abandoned the tray of drinks he was carrying on an empty table and walked deliberately toward Montgomery. "Excuse me, sir," Jake said, his voice quiet but firm. "I need to ask you to refrain from making such comments about other diners." Montgomery looked up, first surprised, then amused. "I beg your pardon?" "Your comments about the lady at that table," Jake continued, acutely aware of other diners watching now, of Mercer's head snapping up from across the room. "They're inappropriate and unwelcome in this establishment." "And who exactly are you to decide what's appropriate?" Montgomery's smile disappeared. "I'm the person currently asking you respectfully to either change your behavior or finish your meal elsewhere." Jake's heart hammered in his chest, but his voice remained steady. Montgomery's face hardened. "Get your manager now." "I'm right here, Mr. Montgomery." Mercer appeared at Jake's side, his face pale. I sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, Jake interrupted. Mr. Montgomery was making deliberately cruel comments about another guest's disability. That violates our restaurant policy on customer respect. The silence in the dining area was absolute now. Jake could feel his job evaporating with each word, but found himself unable to stop. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Emma watching, her eyes wide. "Young man," Montgomery said, his voice dangerously soft, "do you have any idea who I am?" "Someone who should know better," Jake replied simply. Montgomery stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I've been coming to this restaurant for 15 years. I will not be lectured on manners by a server with a stained shirt and clearly no future." He gathered his jacket. "And I promise you, you'll never work in any decent establishment in this city again." As Montgomery stormed toward the exit, Jake finally allowed himself to breathe. The dining room remained uncomfortably silent until the door closed behind the man. Then, surprisingly, a smattering of applause broke out from several tables. "Collins, my office now." Mercer's whispered command held no room for debate. Jake nodded, then turned to Emma. "I apologize for the disturbance, ma'am." For the first time in all the Thursdays she'd dined there, Emma looked directly into his eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice slightly choked. "That's the first time in years someone has actually seen me as a person." The rest of Jake's shift passed in a blur of tension and fatigue. By closing time, his shoulders ached with the certainty of unemployment. How would he pay for his mother's medication now? The medical school bills? Their rent? "Collins," Mercer called as Jake hung up his apron. "In my office before you leave." The walk to the small office felt like a march to execution. Jake steeled himself for the termination speech he knew was coming. "Close the door," Mercer instructed, his face unreadable. He didn't offer Jake a seat. "Mr. Montgomery left something for you." Jake blinked in confusion as Mercer handed him a sealed, cream-colored envelope. "What is this?" "I have no idea. He came back an hour after he left and asked me to give it to you personally." Jake opened the envelope with wary fingers. Inside was a business card for a prestigious medical clinic across town and a handwritten note. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. A proposal you won't refuse." Jake sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the cream-colored business card between his fingers. The embossed lettering caught the pale morning light filtering through his threadbare curtains. "Montgomery Medical Institute, Excellence Through Innovation." He flipped it over for the 100th time, as if expecting the handwritten note on the back to have magically changed overnight. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. A proposal you won't refuse." The arrogance of it made his jaw clench. Who did this Montgomery think he was? Yet the memory of his mother's labored breathing from the next room made his indignation waver. The unpaid medical bills stacked on his kitchen counter, the looming threat of eviction, the medical school tuition installment now officially late. Jake hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch all night. Each time he'd closed his eyes, he'd seen Gerald Montgomery's contemptuous smile, heard his cruel comments about Emma. Then he'd see Emma's face, the quiet dignity in her eyes when she thanked him. The thought of her gave him a strange comfort, even as he contemplated meeting her tormentor. The alarm clock blared, though he was already awake. 7 a.m., 2 hours to decide. "Jake, are you up?" His mother's voice, weaker than it had been even a week ago, called from her bedroom. "Yeah, Mom. Need anything?" He tucked the card into his pocket and pushed himself up from the bed. Catherine Collins was propped against her pillows, her nightstand cluttered with orange prescription bottles. "You look terrible, honey. Did you sleep at all?" "I'm fine." Jake poured water into a glass and helped her take her morning medications, the ones they could still afford. "Listen, I have an appointment this morning. Mrs. Diaz will check on you around noon." "An appointment? With the restaurant?" Hope flickered in her tired eyes. "Something like that," he answered vaguely. Don't worry. In the bathroom, Jake examined his reflection critically. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his only decent dress shirt was badly wrinkled. He did his best to iron it with the ancient steam iron that sputtered and spat rusty water. It would have to do. On the bus across town, Jake rehearsed what he would say to Montgomery. He'd accept no charity, no pity. If this was some twisted attempt at an apology, he'd reject it politely, but firmly. His dignity was one of the few things he still owned outright. The Montgomery Medical Institute occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower in the city's affluent medical district. The contrast with the community clinic where his mother received care couldn't have been more stark. Here, the lobby featured marble floors, abstract art that probably cost more than his yearly rent, and a hushed atmosphere of moneyed exclusivity. "I'm here to see Mr. Montgomery," Jake told the perfectly coiffed receptionist, trying not to sound as out of place as he felt. "Jake Collins, 9 o'clock. She smiled with practiced warmth. "Of course, Mr. Collins. Dr. Montgomery is expecting you. Please follow me." Dr. Montgomery? Jake's confusion must have shown on his face, but the receptionist was already walking toward a private elevator, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor. The elevator opened directly into a corridor lined with framed medical journals featuring Montgomery's name. The receptionist guided Jake past several examination rooms to a large conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Please make yourself comfortable. Dr. Montgomery will be with you shortly." Jake stood awkwardly by the window, unwilling to sink into one of the plush leather chairs. From this height, he could see the neighborhood where he and his mother lived, the stark divide between this world and his own, clearly delineated by building height and condition. The door opened behind him, and Jake turned, his shoulders automatically squaring. Gerald Montgomery entered, dressed not in yesterday's expensive suit, but in a crisp white lab coat, with his name embroidered in blue. He extended his hand as if the restaurant incident had never happened. "Mr. Collins, thank you for coming. Please sit." Jake hesitated before taking Montgomery's hand in a brief, firm shake. He reluctantly sat in the chair Montgomery indicated. "I imagine you're confused," Montgomery began, settling into the chair across from Jake. "About yesterday, about why you're here." "You could say that," Jake replied carefully. Montgomery smiled thinly. "First, let me introduce myself properly. I'm Dr. Gerald Montgomery, Chief of Neurosurgery here and founder of the Montgomery Foundation for Medical Excellence." He slid a glossy brochure across the table. "We identify promising medical students with exceptional potential and provide full scholarships, mentorship, and guaranteed residency placements." Jake glanced at the brochure without touching it. "And this concerns me because you're exactly the kind of candidate we look for." Montgomery leaned forward. "Excellent academic record despite financial hardship, moral courage, unwillingness to tolerate injustice even at personal cost." Jake's confusion deepened. "How do you know about my academic record?" "I make it my business to know everything about potential candidates," Montgomery replied smoothly. He opened a folder on the table, revealing what Jake recognized with shock as his transcript. 3 years of medical school completed with distinction despite working full-time. Particularly strong in neurological studies. "You've been investigating me?" Jake felt a chill despite the room's comfortable temperature. "Not investigating. Evaluating." Montgomery smiled again. "The incident at the restaurant yesterday wasn't entirely spontaneous." Jake stared, comprehension dawning slowly. "You mean your behavior toward that woman, toward Emma, was some kind of test?" "A character assessment, yes. We need to know how our candidates respond under pressure when confronted with ethical challenges." Jake stood abruptly, anger flooding through him. "You deliberately humiliated a disabled woman in public as a test? What kind of doctor are you?" The kind who ensures his resources go to those truly deserving, Montgomery replied calmly. And the woman in question was hardly a random patron. The conference room door opened again, and Jake turned to see Emma Wilson enter. Gone was the slightly hesitant posture from the restaurant. She walked with purpose, dressed in a professional blouse and slacks, her eyes meeting Jake's with a mixture of apology and defiance. "Jake, this is my niece, Emma Wilson," Montgomery said. "She reluctantly assists with our final candidate assessments." Jake looked between them, struggling to process this new information. "Your niece? This was all staged?" "Not all of it," Emma said, her voice firmer than he remembered from the restaurant. "My condition is real. My uncle's comments were real enough too, in their cruelty, if not in their intent." "You set me up," Jake said, the sense of betrayal unexpectedly sharp. "Both of you." "We identified your potential," Montgomery corrected, "and you exceeded expectations. Most candidates either ignore unethical behavior to protect their jobs or intervene in ways that escalate the situation. You defended Emma with both principle and restraint." Jake shook his head in disbelief. "I could have lost my job. I probably still will." "Your job is secure," Montgomery waved dismissively. "La Maison Belle is one of our foundation's investments." Jake struggled to keep up with these revelations. "So what exactly is this proposal I won't refuse?" Montgomery pushed a document folder across the table. "A full scholarship for your remaining medical education, guaranteed placement in our neurosurgical residency program, a stipend that will cover your living expenses and your mother's medical care." Jake stared at the folder without opening it. "And in return, you join our program, train under my direct supervision, eventually become part of our research initiatives." Montgomery's eyes gleamed with something Jake couldn't quite identify. A chance to transform from a struggling waiter to a pioneering neurosurgeon. Jake's mind raced. This was everything he needed, everything his mother needed. Yet something about the situation felt wrong, manipulative. "I need time to think about this," he said finally. "Of course." Montgomery stood. "The application forms are in the folder. I'll need your decision by the end of the week." As Montgomery left, Emma remained, hovering uncertainly by the door. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I don't expect you to understand or forgive the deception." "Why did you agree to it?" Jake asked, genuinely curious despite his anger. Emma's mouth tightened. "Family obligations are complicated. My uncle has helped me in many ways despite his methods." She hesitated. "Just read the application carefully before you sign anything." Before Jake could respond, she followed her uncle out of the room. Jake left the institute in a daze, the folder clutched in his hand. The bus ride home felt surreal. The city unchanged while his entire world had been upended. As he entered his apartment building, the landlord intercepted him in the hallway. "Collins, rent's 3 days late." "I know, I'll have it by Friday," Jake promised, though he had no idea how. "See that you do." Inside the apartment, Jake found his mother on the sofa, a concerning rattle in her chest as she breathed. The kitchen counter now held not just bills, but a final notice from the electric company. His phone rang. The restaurant. Jake answered with resignation, expecting formal termination. "Collins, it's Mercer. You're on probation for yesterday's incident. Montgomery called it in personally. One more issue and you're done. Understand?" "Yes, sir. Thank you." Jake hung up, surprised at the unexpected reprieve. He sat heavily at the kitchen table, spreading the application forms before him. Full scholarship, medical care for his mother, financial security, all for passing a character test he hadn't known he was taking. But as he began to read the fine print, Jake noticed vague references to participation in Foundation research initiatives and exclusive commitment to approved medical practices. The language was oddly non-specific for a legal document. Curious, Jake opened his laptop and searched for information about the Montgomery Foundation. The official website showed smiling students in white coats, testimonials from successful graduates, gleaming laboratories. But when he dug deeper, cross-referencing names, he found odd patterns. Several former scholarship recipients had abruptly changed specialties mid-career. Others had simply disappeared from medical directories entirely. Jake stared out the window at the gathering darkness. The application in one hand, a pen in the other. His mother's coughing from the bedroom, the weight of unpaid bills on the counter. He pressed the pen to paper, then hesitated. Something about this didn't add up. He needed more information before committing himself to Montgomery's program, no matter how desperate his situation. As Jake finally began filling out the form, his phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. "Don't sign anything, we need to talk. Emma." Jake reread Emma's message for the 5th time as he sat in the corner booth of the Grindhouse, a coffee shop far from both the gleaming Montgomery Institute and La Maison Belle. He'd chosen this location deliberately, neutral territory, off the beaten path. 20 minutes early, he watched the door with a mixture of anticipation and wariness, questions multiplying in his mind with each passing minute. The bell above the door chimed and Emma walked in. Jake was struck by how different she appeared from her restaurant visits. Her movements were more fluid here, her posture more confident. She scanned the room, spotting him quickly and navigating between tables with practiced ease. "You came," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Your cryptic warning was pretty compelling," Jake replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Though I'm not sure why I should trust anything you say at this point." Emma's face tightened. "That's fair. I wouldn't trust me either." She unwrapped her scarf, revealing a slender neck and a determined jawline. "But whatever you think of me, you need to understand what you're getting into with my uncle." "I'm listening." Emma hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "The Montgomery Foundation isn't what it appears to be. The glossy brochure, the impressive statistics, the testimonials, they're carefully curated. I gathered that much from my research. Former scholarship recipients seem to vanish or suddenly change career paths." Jake leaned forward. "What I don't understand is why. What exactly does your uncle want from his students? Loyalty, compliance, test subjects who won't ask questions." Emma's voice was bitter. "My uncle believes the traditional paths of medical research are too restrictive, too concerned with ethics and regulations at the expense of progress." Jake studied her face, looking for signs of deception. "And your part in all this? The restaurant setup?" "Complicated." Emma sighed. "Gerald took me in after my parents died when I was 16. He paid for my care, my education. He funded experimental treatments for my condition." She gestured to her leg. "Some helped, some didn't. So you owe him. It's more than that. He's family, the only family I have left. And despite everything, he's done remarkable work. Saved lives when conventional medicine had given up." Her eyes met Jake's directly. "But his methods cross lines, lines that should never be crossed." Jake's phone buzzed. Mrs. Diaz, who was watching his mother. His stomach dropped as he read the message. "I have to go," he said, standing abruptly. "My mom has a fever. High." Emma nodded. "I understand, but Jake..." She reached for his arm. "Don't sign anything until we talk again." Jake rushed from the coffee shop, his mind racing between concern for his mother and the unsettling conversation with Emma. The bus seemed to crawl through traffic, stopping at every light. By the time he reached his apartment, his heart was pounding. Mrs. Diaz met him at the door, her round face creased with worry. "She started burning up about an hour ago. I gave her Tylenol, but it hasn't helped much." Jake found his mother curled on her side, shivering despite the sweat beading on her forehead. One touch, confirmed the dangerous heat radiating from her skin. "Mom, can you hear me?" Catherine's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Jake, is that you? We need to get you to the hospital," he said, already reaching for the phone. "No," she protested weakly. "We can't afford—" "That's not up for discussion." Jake called for an ambulance, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of urgent voices, antiseptic smells, and harsh fluorescent lights. The emergency room doctor confirmed pneumonia, a dangerous complication given Catherine's already compromised immune system. "She needs IV antibiotics and monitoring," the doctor explained. "We'll admit her. Does she have insurance?" "Yes, but it's—" Jake hesitated. "It doesn't cover everything." The doctor gave him a sympathetic look before moving to the next patient. Jake sank into a plastic chair beside his mother's bed, watching the IV drip steadily into her arm. Her breathing seemed slightly easier already, but fear had settled permanently in his chest. A nurse approached with admission paperwork. "You'll need to speak with financial services about coverage. Some of these medications are quite expensive." Jake nodded mechanically, signing where indicated. Every signature felt like another commitment he couldn't fulfill, another promise he would break. By morning, Catherine was stable enough for Jake to leave briefly. He showered and changed at home, then headed to La Maison Belle for his shift, running on coffee and adrenaline. The familiar routine of the restaurant felt surreal after the events of the past 2 days. Mercer eyed him critically as he tied on his apron. "You look like hell, Collins." "Rough night. My mother's in the hospital." Something like sympathy flickered across Mercer's face. "Just don't mess up any orders. We're still watching you after that Montgomery incident." Jake nodded, too exhausted to argue. As he moved between tables, refilling water glasses and taking orders, he found himself hyper-aware of the other diners. Were any of them plants? Part of some elaborate test? The paranoia was exhausting. During his break, Jake overheard 2 doctors at a nearby table discussing a recent medical conference. The Montgomery name caught his attention. "Pushing the boundaries again with that neural regeneration study," one said, cutting into his steak. "IRB would never approve those protocols here," the other replied in a lower tone. "But I hear he's getting results. Did you see the presentation on the proprietary compound? Breakthrough stuff if it pans out. They're adding another one to the program next month, apparently." Jake moved closer, pretending to wipe down an adjacent table. "Poor bastard probably has no idea what he's signing up for," the first doctor chuckled. "Remember that kid last year? The one who—" His companion cleared his throat meaningfully, and both men fell silent as Jake approached to refill their water glasses. After his shift, Jake headed straight to the hospital. Catherine was awake but weak, her face pale against the institutional pillowcase. "They say I can go home tomorrow if the fever stays down," she told him. "The doctor mentioned something about a home care nurse, but I told him we couldn't—" "We'll figure it out," Jake interrupted, taking her hand. "Don't worry about that now." But later, in the hallway, the doctor painted a grimmer picture. "Your mother needs consistent care, Mr. Collins. Without it, she'll be back here within weeks, and next time might be more serious." Jake rubbed his temples, fighting a headache. "What about medication costs?" The doctor hesitated. "There are assistance programs, but they take time to process. In the meantime—" He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. That evening, Jake met Emma at a small park near the hospital. The autumn air was chilly, but the outdoor meeting felt safer somehow, less confined. "How's your mother?" Emma asked, falling into step beside him on the winding path. "Stable for now. Home tomorrow, but she needs care I can't afford." Jake kicked at a fallen leaf. "Your uncle's offer is looking more necessary by the hour. He counts on that desperation." Emma's voice was quiet. "It's how he recruits the most compliant participants. They reached a bench overlooking a small pond. As they sat, a child nearby fell, scraping her knee. Without hesitation, Emma moved to help, pulling a small first aid kit from her bag. Jake watched in surprise as she expertly cleaned and bandaged the wound, speaking gently to the frightened child. "You know your way around medical care," he observed when she returned. "2 years of medical school before I had to drop out," Emma replied. "Turns out, med schools aren't big on accessibility accommodations, or dealing with professors who think disabled students are distracting." Jake winced, remembering Montgomery's cruel comments at the restaurant. "I'm sorry." "Not your fault," she shrugged. "I still study independently. Can't practice officially, but I volunteer at a community clinic sometimes." "Why are you helping me?" Jake asked suddenly. "Warning me about your uncle when it clearly puts you at odds with him." Emma looked out over the water. "Because 5 years ago, I was you, desperate, willing to accept help from someone I knew wasn't entirely trustworthy." She turned to face him. "And I've been paying for that decision ever since." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a series of small, circular scars running up her arm. "Experimental treatments. Some helped my mobility temporarily. Others made things worse. All of them were test runs for procedures he later refined and published." Jake stared at the scars, professional interest mingling with horror. "He experimented on his own niece. With my consent, initially. That's how it starts. You're a collaborator, a pioneer. By the time you realize you're just a subject, you're in too deep." She rolled her sleeve down. "I've seen what happens to his scholarship recipients, Jake. They either become like him or they break." Jake pulled the scholarship application from his bag, now crumpled from being carried everywhere. He flipped to the final page, where a vaguely worded clause mentioned participation in approved research initiatives and commitment to foundation protocols. What does this really mean? It means you belong to him. Your time, your body, your career, all at his discretion. Emma's face was grim. And your mother's care becomes the leverage that ensures your compliance. Jake felt sick. "I need to find another option." "There's a smaller university with a decent scholarship program," Emma suggested. "The deadline's next week. I could help you apply." For the first time in days, Jake felt a flicker of hope. "That would be... thank you." As they stood to leave, Jake's phone rang. The hospital. Catherine had developed a severe reaction to one of the antibiotics. He needed to come immediately. "Go," Emma urged. "Call me when you know more." Jake ran all the way to the hospital, fear clawing at his throat. When he arrived, a doctor he hadn't seen before was adjusting Catherine's IV. "We've stabilized her," the physician explained, "but she needs a specialized treatment protocol given her complex condition." "Whatever she needs," Jake said automatically. "Good. I've consulted with a specialist who's willing to take her case." The doctor handed Jake a business card. "He's one of the best in the field." Jake looked down at the card, his blood running cold as he recognized the embossed lettering. Montgomery Medical Institute. Excellence through innovation. When Jake asked who could perform the specific surgery his mother needed, Emma responded with a grave look. "There are only 3 specialists in the country, and my Uncle Gerald is one of them." Jake stared at Montgomery's business card, the edges sharp against his trembling fingers. The hospital corridor seemed to narrow around him, fluorescent lights suddenly too bright, too revealing. His mother's condition, the specialized treatment she needed, Montgomery's sudden involvement, it couldn't all be coincidence. "Dr. Montgomery specifically requested to be consulted on your mother's case," the physician continued, oblivious to Jake's inner turmoil. "Quite fortunate, really. He rarely takes on patients outside his research protocols." "I bet," Jake muttered, pocketing the card. "When will he see her?" "Tomorrow morning. He's requested her complete medical history." The doctor handed Jake a thick consent form. "You'll need to sign this." Jake took the papers without reading them. "I'd like to stay with my mother tonight. Of course, I'll have a nurse bring you a blanket." Alone with his sleeping mother, Jake studied her face. The lines deepened by years of worry, the gray hair that had appeared too early. 3 years ago, when he'd started medical school, she'd been vibrant, working full-time, encouraging his dreams. Now her life hung by a thread that Gerald Montgomery somehow controlled. Jake's phone vibrated. Emma's message was brief. "Did you get home okay?" He replied, "At hospital, Mom worse. Your uncle conveniently appeared as her specialist." The response came quickly. "This is how it starts, be careful." Jake leaned back in the uncomfortable chair, exhaustion washing over him. Despite his best efforts, his eyes closed, sleep claiming him in fitful bursts interrupted by nurses checking vitals throughout the night. Morning brought Gerald Montgomery striding into the room like he owned it, white coat impeccable, smile calculated. 2 residents trailed behind him, notebooks ready. "Mr. Collins, how unfortunate we meet again under these circumstances." Montgomery nodded toward Catherine. "Your mother's condition is quite serious, but manageable with the right approach." Jake straightened, instantly alert. What approach would that be exactly? An aggressive combination therapy. Proprietary medications developed at our institute, followed by a minor surgical procedure to address the underlying inflammation. Montgomery handed the residents Catherine's chart. "We'll transfer her to my facility this afternoon." "Wait," Jake interjected. "What about insurance coverage? My mother's plan won't—" "A technicality." Montgomery waved dismissively. "As part of our training program, certain patients receive treatment at greatly reduced cost. Educational purposes, you understand." Jake understood perfectly. His mother was being offered as bait. "And in return?" he asked quietly. Montgomery's smile never reached his eyes. "We'll discuss the details of your scholarship application later today. My office, 4 o'clock. After Montgomery left, Jake spent hours researching alternative options, making desperate calls to other specialists, insurance representatives, and patient advocacy groups. Each path led to the same dead end. The treatment Catherine needed was specialized, expensive, and unavailable to someone with her limited coverage, except through Montgomery. At 3:30, Jake kissed his mother's forehead and whispered a promise to return soon. She was being prepped for transfer to Montgomery's facility, sedated, but stable. The autumn air bit through his thin jacket as Jake waited for the bus to Montgomery's clinic. His phone buzzed with a reminder about a small university's scholarship application due that week, the alternative Emma had mentioned. A thread of hope, however thin. Montgomery's receptionist ushered Jake directly into the doctor's opulent office. Unlike the sterile conference room of their first meeting, this space showcased Montgomery's accomplishments. Walls lined with awards, photographs with celebrities and politicians, framed journal covers featuring his research. "You've had time to consider my offer," Montgomery began without preamble, indicating the folder on his desk, Jake's incomplete application. "Your mother's situation adds a certain urgency, doesn't it?" Jake remained standing. "I want to be clear about what you're proposing. My mother receives the treatment she needs, and in exchange, I join your program. Is that correct?" "Precisely, a mutually beneficial arrangement." Montgomery leaned back in his leather chair. "Your mother receives cutting-edge care that would otherwise be inaccessible, and you receive an unparalleled medical education. And my participation in your research?" Something flickered across Montgomery's face. Appreciation, perhaps, that Jake wasn't being naive. "Required, of course. All scholarship recipients contribute to our research initiatives. It's how we advance medicine. Brilliant minds working together, unhindered by excessive regulation." "Unhindered by ethics, you mean?" Montgomery's smile tightened. "Ethics are relative, Mr. Collins. What's more ethical? adhering to bureaucratic restrictions while patients die waiting for approved treatments, or pushing boundaries to save lives now? Jake didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Why me? There must be hundreds of medical students with better credentials, fewer complications." "Character can't be taught, Mr. Collins. Knowledge can." Montgomery stood, moving to a wall of photographs. "These are my success stories. Former students now leading departments worldwide, developing treatments that save thousands." Jake noticed something in the photos, a progression. The earliest showed young doctors smiling broadly. In later images, the smiles seemed fixed, eyes increasingly hollow. "I'll need time to consider the full implications," Jake said carefully. "Of course. Though I should mention, your mother's transfer can only proceed once our arrangement is formalized." Montgomery's tone was pleasant, the threat clear. Jake left the clinic with the application still unsigned, his mind racing. The bus ride to the small university across town felt like his last hope. The admissions office was nearly closed when he arrived, but a sympathetic counselor agreed to speak with him. "We do have a medical scholarship program," she confirmed, reviewing his transcripts. "Your academic record is impressive, despite the recent gap." "Financial hardship," Jake explained, "and family medical issues." "I understand. The deadline is Friday and we'll need 2 professional recommendations." She smiled encouragingly. "It's competitive, but not impossible." Jake thanked her, clutching the application like a lifeline. As he turned to leave, he noticed a photograph on the wall, the university's board of trustees. Gerald Montgomery stood prominently in the center. That night, Jake returned to the hospital to find his mother had been moved to a private room with equipment he recognized as far superior to standard hospital issue. A nurse explained that Dr. Montgomery had expedited her transfer while awaiting final paperwork. Catherine was awake, looking better than she had in days. "Jake, honey, this new doctor is wonderful. He says his treatment will have me home within weeks." Jake forced a smile. "That's great, Mom. He mentioned something about you joining his program? A scholarship?" Hope brightened her tired eyes. "Jake, is this real?" "It's complicated, but don't worry." He squeezed her hand. "How are you feeling?" "Better than I have in months. They've given me something for the pain. It actually works." Jake recognized the medication name on her chart, an experimental compound not yet FDA approved. His medical training raised immediate concerns, but the visible improvement in his mother was undeniable. A text from Emma interrupted his thoughts. "Progress with the alternative scholarship?" He replied, "Montgomery's on their board. Probably another dead end." After visiting hours ended, Jake stopped by his apartment to shower and change. Returning to his mother's floor, he noticed a lab technician he recognized from his earlier visits to Montgomery's facility, the nervous man with trembling hands who had refused to speak with him. The technician was collecting blood samples from patients, his movements mechanical, eyes downcast. Jake followed him to a quiet corridor near the lab. "Excuse me," Jake began. "We met at Dr. Montgomery's clinic. I'm a prospective student." The technician's head snapped up, eyes widening in recognition and fear. "I don't know you." His hands shook violently, nearly dropping the blood samples. "Please," Jake persisted. "I need to understand what happens in that program. My mother's life depends on the choice I make." "There is no choice," the man whispered, looking frantically over his shoulder. "Once you're in, you're his. The treatments work, but the cost—" He pushed up his sleeve, revealing a pattern of small circular scars, similar to Emma's, but more extensive, angry-looking. "What did they do to you?" "Neural implants. Experimental. Some worked, others—" He trailed off as footsteps approached. "I can't be seen talking to you." 2 security guards rounded the corner, their expressions hardening when they spotted Jake. "Sir, "This area is restricted," one announced, moving to stand between Jake and the technician. "Staff only. I was just asking for directions," Jake lied smoothly. "This gentleman is disturbing me," the technician said loudly. His earlier conspiracy vanished. "I've never seen him before." The guards escorted Jake firmly toward the exit. "Hospital policy requires we report all unauthorized personnel in restricted areas," one informed him. "Please don't return without proper clearance." Outside in the parking lot, Jake's phone chimed. An email from the small university. His scholarship application had been rejected due to undisclosed concerns raised by a confidential reference. Jake's hands clenched into fists. Every alternative path was being systematically blocked. When he arrived for his shift at La Maison Belle the next evening, Mercer was waiting by the staff entrance, his expression grim. "Collins, office now." Jake followed wordlessly, already knowing what was coming. "This isn't working out," Mercer began without preamble, sliding a termination letter across the desk. "We've received multiple complaints from valued customers regarding your attitude and service quality." "Which customers specifically?" Jake asked, though he already knew. "That's confidential. You'll receive your final paycheck by mail." Mercer wouldn't meet his eyes. "I'm sorry, Jake, my hands are tied." Jake nodded silently, untying his apron. As he headed toward the exit, Mike caught his arm. "This isn't right, man. I know what's happening." The maitre d' looked around cautiously before pressing a business card into Jake's hand. "My cousin works at County General. They might have a position in patient transport. It's not much, but it's something." "Thanks, Mike." Jake had just reached his apartment building when his phone rang. The hospital. His mother had been removed from the approved treatment list due to insurance verification issues. All specialized care was suspended pending financial review. As Jake stared at the phone in disbelief, a text message appeared on the screen. From Gerald Montgomery. "Deadline expired, but always a second chance for those who truly value opportunity." Jake sat on the bare floor of his apartment, surrounded by the physical manifestations of his collapsing life. Overdue bills fanned out in a semicircle, electricity with a disconnect notice, rent now 15 days late, credit card statements with bloated interest charges. The final box of his mother's medication lay open beside him, 3 pills remaining. 2 days' worth, if she took less than the prescribed dosage. Outside, the evening sky darkened early, matching his mood. The apartment felt unnaturally quiet, without his mother's presence, without the sound of her favorite old records or her gentle humming from the kitchen. He picked up the termination letter from La Maison Belle, reading the carefully crafted corporate language, disguising what he knew was Montgomery's influence. The sharp knock on the door startled him. Jake rose slowly, muscles stiff from sitting too long on the hard floor. "Collins, open up!" The landlord's voice boomed through the thin door. "I know you're in there." Jake opened the door to Mr. Ramirez's flushed face, the man's substantial frame blocking the hallway light. 2 weeks late, Collins. That's it. I've been patient because of your mother's situation, but business is business." Ramirez thrust a formal notice into Jake's hands. 48 hours to pay in full or vacate. No exceptions. "Mr. Ramirez, please. I just need until what, your next job? Where's that coming from?" "Word gets around, Collins. Montgomery's got influence all over this city." The landlord's expression softened slightly. "Look, I got a family too. I can't carry tenants who can't pay." The door closed with a decisive click, leaving Jake staring at the eviction notice. Another piece of paper declaring his failure. His phone buzzed with a notification from the hospital's patient portal. Catherine's vitals had dropped again. Without the specialized treatment Montgomery had begun and then withdrawn, she was declining rapidly. Jake moved to her bedroom, meticulously organized despite her long absence. Her old nursing textbooks lined the shelves. Catherine had been a pediatric nurse before illness forced her retirement. He sat on her bed, picked up the framed photo of his father in his white coat, the proud new doctor who had died of a heart attack before Jake's 10th birthday. "What would you do, Dad?" he whispered to the smiling face. "What's the right call when there are no right options?" A harsh coughing spasm seized him suddenly, deep, painful, and alarmingly familiar. The same cough that had started his mother's decline. Jake pressed his hand to his chest, feeling the rattle. Stress, exhaustion, and poor ventilation in the apartment were taking their toll. He couldn't afford to get sick now. He improvised treatment from their limited medicine cabinet, aspirin for the fever he could feel building, honey for his throat. Physician, heal thyself, he thought bitterly. He'd learned enough in medical school to recognize pneumonia's early symptoms, but without antibiotics or rest, knowledge alone was useless. By morning, the fever had intensified. Jake dragged himself to every employment possibility within walking distance. The coffee shop needed someone with barista experience. The bookstore had just laid off 3 people. The convenience store owner took one look at Jake's flushed face and stepped back. "You sick? Can't have that around customers." 5 more rejections followed. At each, Jake felt the invisible hand of Montgomery closing doors before he could reach them. By mid-afternoon, Jake found himself on a familiar street. Mike was taking his break outside La Maison Belle, smoking a cigarette despite the chilly wind. "Jesus, you look like death," Mike said, dropping his cigarette to grasp Jake's arm. "What happened?" "Everything," Jake managed, his voice raspy. "Mom's worse. I'm being evicted, can't find work anywhere." Mike glanced over his shoulder at the restaurant. "Gerald Montgomery is an investor in half the businesses in the city center. Old money, old connections, people don't cross him. I've noticed. My cousin at County General tried, but they've got a hiring freeze. Montgomery sits on their board too." Mike hesitated. "Look, I shouldn't tell you this, but Montgomery was here yesterday, meeting with the owner. I overheard them talking about you, how you'd be back once you'd learned your lesson." Jake leaned against the wall, suddenly dizzy. "He's systematically destroying any alternative I might have." "Whatever he wants from you, it must be important." Mike checked his watch. "I gotta get back here." He pressed some folded bills into Jake's hand. "It's not much, but it'll help with food at least." "I can't take—" "Shut up and take it. Friends help friends." Mike disappeared inside, leaving Jake with $200 and a deepening sense of desperation. Back at the hospital, Jake found his mother awake but disoriented, her breathing labored. "Jake?" Her voice was thin, confused. "Where am I?" "The hospital, Mom, remember?" He took her hand, alarmed at how cold it felt. "They stopped the new medicine," she whispered, the one that was helping. "The nurse said, insurance problems." Jake swallowed hard. "I'm working on that. Don't worry." A young doctor Jake didn't recognize entered, frowning at Catherine's chart. "Mr. Collins, we need to discuss your mother's care plan. Without the specialized treatment Dr. Montgomery initiated, her condition is deteriorating rapidly." "So restart it," Jake said, failing to keep the edge from his voice. "It's not that simple. The medication is experimental, only available through Montgomery's research protocol. Your mother was withdrawn from the program." The doctor's expression was sympathetic but firm. "We're doing what we can with standard treatments, but her response has been minimal." After the doctor left, Jake sat beside his mother, watching her restless sleep. His own fever spiked, chills racking his body as night fell. A nurse brought him a blanket, her concerned gaze taking in his flushed face. "You should be in a bed yourself," she observed. "I'm fine," Jake lied. "Just tired." At midnight, his phone lit up with Gerald Montgomery's number. Jake stepped into the hallway to answer. "Your mother's recent test results are concerning. Montgomery said without preamble. "Without intervention, her prognosis is poor." "You engineered this situation," Jake responded, his voice hoarse. "You're using her life to control my choices." "I'm offering a solution to a problem you cannot solve alone." Montgomery's tone remained clinical, detached. "Your application remains open. My offer stands. At what cost?" "Progress requires sacrifice, Mr. Collins. Throughout medical history, advancements have come from those willing to push boundaries." A pause. "Your mother has perhaps 2 weeks without my treatment protocol. How will you live with yourself if pride costs her life?" The call ended, leaving Jake trembling with fever and fury. He returned to his mother's room, collapsing into the chair beside her bed. Sometime in the early morning hours, he made his decision. At dawn, Jake called the number Emma had given him. She answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting. "I need to see you," he said. "Tonight. The park by the river." The day passed in a blur of fever and planning. Jake discharged himself from his volunteer observation status at the hospital, promising to return that evening. He spent his last dollars on a used laptop from a pawn shop, using the hospital's public Wi-Fi to research everything he could find about Montgomery's research, his past, his vulnerabilities. By nightfall, Jake was waiting on a park bench, huddled in his jacket against the cold and his climbing fever. Emma appeared like a ghost through the gathering fog, her face tight with concern. "You're sick," she said immediately, sitting beside him. "You need a doctor." "Can't afford one," Jake replied with a weak smile. "Besides, I almost am one." "What happened?" Emma asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. Jake told her everything: his firing, the scholarship rejection, his mother's treatment withdrawal, the eviction notice. As he spoke, Emma's face grew increasingly grim. "This is his pattern," she said quietly. "Isolate, destabilize, then offer salvation with strings attached. He did it to me when my parents died, to others before you." "I'm out of options, Emma," Jake's voice cracked. "He's systematically destroyed every alternative. My mother is dying without his treatment. I have nowhere to live after tomorrow. I can't even get a job making coffee." "There are always options." "Really?" "Because from where I'm sitting, I have exactly one path forward." Jake pulled Montgomery's contract from his pocket. "Sign this. Get my mother the care she needs. Finish my education. Whatever comes after can't be worse than watching her die when I could have prevented it." Emma was silent for a long moment. Then, with deliberate movements, she rolled up her sleeve. In the dim park lighting, Jake could see the scars more clearly now, not just the small circular marks he'd noticed before, but larger surgical scars running the length of her forearm. "This was the first," she said, indicating a particularly jagged line. "An experimental nerve graft when I was 17. It improved my mobility for 6 months, then caused complications he hadn't anticipated." She rolled up her other sleeve, then pushed aside her collar to reveal more scars across her shoulder. Each one was supposed to be the solution, the breakthrough. Each one came with a promise that this time would be different. "Your own uncle did this to you?" "With my consent at first. I was desperate, willing to try anything to walk normally again." Her eyes met Jake's. "My condition isn't congenital. It resulted from one of his earliest experiments, a procedure he performed on me when I was 14 after my parents died. A procedure that went wrong but taught him valuable lessons for his research." Jake stared, medical horror mixing with human revulsion. "He experimented on a child? His niece?" "He doesn't see me as his niece. He doesn't see you as a person, or your mother. We're all just data points, opportunities for advancement." Emma's voice hardened. "If you sign that contract, your mother gets treatment, yes, but you become his property in all but name, and once he has that leverage over you, there's nothing he won't ask you to do to endure." Jake looked down at the contract in his hands, the pages blurring as fever and exhaustion clouded his vision. "What choice do I have?" "We make one." Emma's eyes gleamed with determination. "I have information about what he's been doing, documentation, but I need your help to use it effectively." "Why now? Why me?" "Because you're the first person he's targeted who fought back, who saw through him immediately." She touched his arm. "And because I'm tired of watching him destroy lives while calling it progress." Jake nodded slowly, decision crystallizing through the fog of fever. With trembling hands, he signed Montgomery's contract while sliding a small activated recorder into the inner pocket of his jacket, knowing he was about to enter the lion's den. Jake watched anxiously as two orderlies transferred his mother from the hospital gurney to the plush bed in Montgomery's private medical wing. The difference between the standard hospital and this facility was striking. Polished marble floors instead of scuffed linoleum, soft ambient lighting replacing harsh fluorescence, and equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction film rather than a medical facility. "Your mother will be comfortable here," Dr. Montgomery said, materializing beside Jake. "We've already started her on the specialized treatment protocol. You should see improvement within days." Jake nodded silently, fighting the conflicting emotions swirling within him. Relief that his mother would receive care, revulsion at the price, fear of what he'd agreed to. "Your quarters are prepared," Montgomery continued, guiding Jake away from his mother's room. "As a resident scholar, you'll have accommodations in our student wing." The student wing turned out to be a modernist building connected to the main facility by a glass walkway. Jake's room was small but well-appointed, a single bed, desk, private bathroom, and window overlooking manicured grounds. It reminded him disconcertingly of upscale prison cells he'd seen in documentaries. "You'll find your uniforms in the closet," Montgomery said. "Classes begin at 7 a.m. Your schedule has been uploaded to this." He handed Jake a sleek tablet. "This device also serves as your ID, meal card, and building access. Don't lose it." As Montgomery turned to leave, Jake noticed a tiny camera in the upper corner of the room, its red light blinking steadily. "Is privacy not included in the scholarship package?" Jake asked, pointing to the camera. Montgomery smiled thinly. "Safety protocols. All common areas and corridors are monitored. Rest assured, bathrooms are camera-free." His expression hardened slightly. "We invest considerably in our scholars, Mr. Collins. Monitoring ensures that investment is protected." After Montgomery left, Jake examined his new living space more carefully. He found two more cameras, one overlooking the desk, another focused on the door. The tablet revealed that his building access was restricted to specific areas at specific times. His movements would be tracked, controlled, visible. That night, Jake slept poorly, dreams filled with surgical instruments and his mother's voice calling for help. He woke at 5, showered quickly, and donned the required uniform, black pants and a gray button-down with the Montgomery Foundation logo embroidered on the chest. The lecture hall was already half full when Jake arrived. About 20 students sat in tiered seating, all wearing identical uniforms, all focused intently on their tablets. No one spoke. No one looked up when he entered. Precisely at 7, Montgomery strode in, accompanied by two assistants wheeling a complex piece of equipment. "Welcome to Advanced Neurological Procedures," Montgomery began without preamble. "Today we'll be examining a proprietary technique for neural regeneration following traumatic injury." What followed was both fascinating and disturbing. Montgomery detailed surgical approaches that Jake had never encountered in his standard medical education, procedures that bypassed conventional nerve repair methods using compounds that weren't mentioned in any textbook Jake had studied. "Note the application method," Montgomery instructed as a video played, showing an unconscious patient receiving injections directly into exposed spinal tissue. "Standard protocol would consider this approach too aggressive, but our results speak for themselves." Jake took detailed notes, his medical curiosity battling with ethical alarm. The techniques were brilliant, innovative, and clearly operated in regulatory gray areas. When Montgomery displayed outcome data, Jake carefully copied the numbers, noting inconsistencies in the success rates presented versus what he could calculate from the raw figures briefly shown. After class, a slender young woman with short dark hair approached him. "You're the new one." "Jake, right? I'm Samantha." Her smile seemed practiced, her eyes evaluating. "First day is always overwhelming. It gets easier." Something in her hesitation caught Jake's attention. "How long have you been in the program?" 2 years. I'm in the advanced placement track now." She rolled up her sleeve slightly, revealing a small circular scar identical to the ones Jake had seen on Emma. "Contributed to 3 major studies already." Before Jake could respond, his tablet chimed. A message appeared. "Report to Medical Wing B for maternal visitation. 15 minutes allowed." "Better not be late," Samantha advised, her voice dropping. "They track everything." Catherine Collins looked remarkably improved after just 24 hours of Montgomery's treatment. Her color had returned, and her breathing seemed easier. "This place is amazing, Jake," she said, squeezing his hand. "The doctors, the care. I haven't felt this good in months." She looked around the private room with its tasteful artwork and large window. "But it must be so expensive. How can we possibly—" "It's covered, Mom. Part of my new scholarship program." Jake forced a smile. "I'm training directly under Dr. Montgomery now." "That's wonderful. Your father would be so proud." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're going to be an amazing doctor, Jake." Jake swallowed the lump in his throat. "How's the treatment going? Any side effects?" "Nothing significant. Some tingling in my hands, a little dizziness. They say that's normal as my body adjusts to the medication." She smiled. "Dr. Montgomery himself checks on me twice daily. Did you know he treated a famous actress with the same condition? She's completely recovered now." Jake doubted that story, but nodded encouragingly. As they continued talking, a nurse appeared in the doorway, tapping her watch meaningfully. His 15 minutes were up. After a week of intensive classes, monitoring his mother's progress, and carefully documenting everything he observed, Jake had begun mapping the Institute's routines and security protocols. The cameras were omnipresent but followed predictable patterns. Staff changed shifts at regular intervals. Even Montgomery kept a rigid schedule. Jake had identified potential allies as well. An older nurse named Helen seemed less indoctrinated than other staff, occasionally bending minor rules for patients' comfort. One of the lab technicians, Marcus, visibly flinched whenever Montgomery entered a room. Fear indicated potential resentment, which Jake might leverage. His opportunity came when Helen was assigned to his mother's overnight care. Jake brought her coffee during her break, initiating casual conversation about his mother's remarkable improvement. "Dr. Montgomery's treatment protocol is quite effective," he commented. Helen glanced around before responding quietly. "Effective, yes. The long-term effects are another matter." "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "I've been here 15 years, seen miracle recoveries like your mother's, seen what sometimes follows." She took a sip of coffee. "Just keep detailed records of everything. Symptoms, improvements, side effects. Don't rely on the official charts." "Have there been problems with record keeping?" "Let's just say, selective documentation is an art form here." She stood to leave. "Your mother's a lovely woman. I hope her recovery is permanent." That cryptic conversation led Jake to spend his nights reviewing patient files he could access through his tablet. Most were heavily redacted, but patterns emerged. Successful initial treatments followed by complications months later. Complications that required additional, proprietary interventions. During his 3rd week, Jake was invited to observe a procedure, a significant step up in access. The patient was a middle-aged man receiving neural implants meant to control seizures. Jake recognized him immediately as the frightened lab technician he'd encountered at the hospital. Montgomery performed the surgery with undeniable brilliance. his hands steady, his knowledge impressive. Jake watched, simultaneously horrified and fascinated, as Montgomery inserted microscopic devices along the man's spine. Devices not approved by any regulatory body Jake was familiar with. These implants will not only control his seizures, but allow us to monitor neural responses in real time, Montgomery explained to the observing students. This particular subject has a unique neurological profile that makes him ideal for our longitudinal study. Subject, not patient, Jake noted mentally. The distinction was telling. That evening, Jake sought out Samantha, finding her alone in the student lounge, staring blankly at her tablet. "The technician in surgery today," Jake began carefully. "He worked in diagnostics before, didn't he?" Samantha looked up, her eyes darting to check for others before responding. "Marcus. He was a scholarship recipient like us. Brilliant pathologist." She lowered her voice. "Had a breakthrough, then tried to publish independently. That's frowned upon here. So now he's a test subject? We're all test subjects, Jake." She pushed up her sleeve, revealing not just the circular scar he'd seen before, but rows of them tracking up her arm. "Some of us just have better accommodations than others." Samantha's revelation shocked Jake, but not as much as her resigned acceptance. Whatever Montgomery had done to break her spirit was perhaps more frightening than the experimental procedures themselves. Jake continued gathering evidence, carefully copying patient records to the secure cloud storage Emma had established. He documented conversations, photographed restricted areas when possible, and maintained his role as the eager student, asking questions, showing interest, gaining Montgomery's approval and increased access. His mother continued to improve dramatically, now walking short distances unassisted. Jake monitored her closely, recording every medication, every treatment, every vital sign, creating his own parallel medical records separate from Montgomery's selective documentation. 3 weeks into his infiltration, Jake was summoned to attend a special ceremony. All scholarship recipients gathered in an auditorium as Montgomery presented them with personalized lab coats bearing the Foundation's emblem, a stylized brain intersected by lightning bolts. "You are now officially part of our inner circle," Montgomery announced proudly. "Few medical students in the world receive the education you are privileged to access. Fewer still will contribute to advancements that will revolutionize neuroscience as we know it." Jake accepted his coat, joining the solemn line of students as photographers documented the moment. The flash of cameras, the polite applause, the practiced smiles, all felt surreal, like participants in a play pretending normalcy, while something sinister lurked beneath. After the ceremony, Montgomery approached Jake, placing a hand on his shoulder with paternal familiarity. "Your mother's response to treatment has been exceptional," he said, steering Jake away from the others. "Tomorrow, I'm performing a minor but critical procedure to ensure her continued improvement. I'd like you to assist me directly." Jake's pulse quickened. "I'd be honored, sir." Montgomery's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Excellent. Oh, and Jake, that little project you've been working on with Miss Wilson, documenting my methods, gathering evidence, it's not exactly what you planned, is it?" As the security guards locked Jake in his room, the clinic's loudspeakers announced an emergency. Patient Catherine Collins, his mother, was having a severe reaction to the experimental procedure, and all resident physicians were to report immediately to the ICU. Jake's heart thundered against his ribs as he processed Montgomery's words. The doctor knew. Somehow he knew everything. The evidence collection, the coordination with Emma, all of it exposed. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jake stammered, fighting to keep his expression neutral. Montgomery's smile widened, predatory and confident. "Please, Mr. Collins, we monitor all communications in and out of this facility. Did you really think those encrypted messages to Emma were secure? That we wouldn't notice your unauthorized access to patient files?" He adjusted his sleeve cuff casually. "I've been watching brilliant young minds try to outsmart me for decades. You're good, but not exceptional in that regard." Jake's mind raced, calculating how much was truly compromised. The recorder in his pocket suddenly felt heavier, more conspicuous. "What happens now?" Jake asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Now? Now we proceed as planned. Your mother's surgery is scheduled for 7 a.m. You'll assist me, as discussed." Montgomery's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Consider this a lesson in consequences, Mr. Collins. Your mother's prognosis depends entirely on your cooperation from this point forward." As Montgomery walked away, Jake fought the urge to run. Instead, he maintained his composure until reaching the privacy of his bathroom, the one place without cameras. There, he sent a final coded message to Emma. "Operation compromised. Proceeding with contingency. Be ready." Sleep proved impossible. Jake paced his small room, rehearsing surgical procedures in his mind while simultaneously trying to formulate a backup plan. By dawn, he was exhausted but resolute. Whatever happened in that operating room, he would protect his mother. The surgical preparation area hummed with efficient activity as Jake scrubbed in, watching his mother being readied for the procedure through the observation window. She appeared peaceful under sedation, unaware of the storm surrounding her care. "Nervous, Mr. Collins?" Montgomery appeared beside him, already gowned. "Your first direct surgical assistance is a significant milestone." "I'm ready," Jake replied, focusing on keeping his hands steady as he completed the scrubbing protocol. The operating theater was state-of-the-art, more advanced than anything Jake had seen during his medical training. Multiple screens displayed Catherine's vital signs, brain activity, and three-dimensional scans of her nervous system. 2 other surgeons and 3 nurses stood ready, all wearing the Montgomery Foundation's distinctive surgical caps. "Today's procedure addresses the inflammatory cascade affecting Mrs. Collins's central nervous system," Montgomery explained, for the benefit of the observers watching from behind glass. "We'll be utilizing our proprietary neural modifier, currently in Phase 3 trials, alongside a targeted delivery system I've personally developed." Jake recognized the setup immediately. This wasn't the minor procedure Montgomery had described. This was an experimental technique he'd seen documented in the restricted files, one with significant risks and variable outcomes. "Dr. Montgomery," Jake said quietly as they moved to the table, "this procedure's profile doesn't match my mother's current symptoms or needs." "Questioning my clinical judgment already, Mr. Collins." Montgomery's eyes crinkled above his surgical mask, not with humor but warning. "Your mother's case presents a unique opportunity to address underlying pathologies before they manifest. Trust the process." As the anesthesiologist confirmed Catherine was fully sedated, Montgomery made the initial incision with practiced precision. Jake assisted mechanically, passing instruments, maintaining the surgical field, his medical training battling with his mounting horror as he recognized Montgomery was deviating from standard protocol. "Note the specialized delivery mechanism," Montgomery narrated to the observation gallery as he prepared to inject a pearlescent blue substance directly into Catherine's exposed spinal tissue. "This bypasses the blood-brain barrier, allowing precise targeting of affected neural clusters." Jake recognized the substance from the restricted files, an experimental compound with severe documented side effects that had been carefully omitted from published results. "Sir," Jake interjected, his voice steadier than he felt, "that dosage appears significantly higher than the established protocol." A tense silence fell over the operating room. Montgomery's eyes narrowed above his mask. "Your observational skills are impressive," he finally said, his tone dangerously soft. "But this adjusted dosage accounts for your mother's unique presentation. Now, if you'd please continue assisting rather than questioning." As Montgomery positioned the specialized syringe, Jake made his decision. With a deliberate movement that appeared accidental, he bumped Montgomery's arm, not enough to cause injury to his mother, but sufficient to disrupt the precise injection. "My apologies," Jake said quickly. My hand slipped. Montgomery glared but maintained his professional demeanor. "Nurse Baker, please join us at the table. Mr. Collins, perhaps you should observe from a slight distance for this delicate phase." The disruption achieved its purpose. With another nurse now closely witnessing the procedure, Montgomery reverted to the standard dosage protocol, documented in the official files, rather than the experimental elevation he had planned. The remainder of the surgery proceeded without incident, but Jake could feel Montgomery's cold fury radiating across the operating table. As they completed the final sutures, Catherine's vitals remained stable, a small victory in what Jake knew was becoming a dangerous game. After scrubbing out, Jake headed directly to recovery to monitor his mother. He had barely settled beside her bed when the emergency alert system blared throughout the facility. "Code Blue, Recovery Room 4. Code Blue, Recovery Room 4. Jake froze. Room 4 was his mother's room, but she was right here, breathing steadily, monitors showing normal function. Before he could process this contradiction, security personnel burst in. "Mr. Collins, come with us immediately," the lead guard commanded. "There must be some mistake," Jake protested, gesturing to his stable mother. "She's fine." "This isn't about your mother. Dr. Montgomery requires your presence. Now." Jake was escorted to Montgomery's private office, where the doctor waited behind his desk, face thunderous. "You deliberately sabotaged a crucial procedure," Montgomery stated without preamble. "Do you understand what you've done?" "I prevented an experimental dosage that wasn't medically indicated," Jake replied, surprising himself with his steadiness. "The standard protocol was sufficient." Montgomery laughed, a chilling sound devoid of humor. "You think you understand my research because you've stolen glimpses of restricted files? Everything I do is precisely calculated. That experimental dosage was tailored specifically for your mother's condition. The same way you tailored treatments for Emma that left her partially paralyzed," Jake countered. "Or for Marcus, who went from brilliant pathologist to trembling lab technician." Something dangerous flickered in Montgomery's eyes. "You're playing a game you cannot win, Mr. Collins. Your mother's improvement is temporary, without the complete protocol. Within days, her symptoms will return, worse than before." "That's convenient," Jake said bitterly. "Create dependency on your treatments by ensuring patients can never fully recover." "That's enough!" Montgomery slammed his hand on the desk. "You're confined to quarters until further notice. Your mother remains under my care, receiving standard and now inadequate treatment per your interference." Security escorted Jake to his room, now with a guard posted outside. Through his window, Jake watched the sun set, calculating his next move. His tablet had been confiscated, cutting off communication with Emma and the outside world. Around midnight, a soft knock at his door preceded Samantha's furtive entrance. The guard was notably absent. "You've done it now," she whispered, glancing nervously at the cameras. "They're reviewing all your activities, all your communications." "How are you here? Where's the guard?" "Staff rotation. I have 2 minutes." She pressed something into his palm, a small key card. "Emergency exit in the east stairwell. It's not monitored between 2 and 2:15 a.m. during system resets." "Why are you helping me?" Jake asked, closing his fingers around the card. Samantha pushed up her sleeve, revealing the injection marks. "Because I wish someone had helped me before it was too late." Her eyes met his, clear and determined, for the first time since he'd met her. "Montgomery's presenting your mother's case to the board tomorrow as a breakthrough. If you're going to move against him, it has to be now." After she left, Jake formulated his plan. At precisely 2 a.m., he used the card to access the east stairwell, descending to the research level where patient records were stored. Using Samantha's credentials, he downloaded comprehensive data on Montgomery's experimental protocols, failed treatments, and manipulated results. Jake then made his way to his mother's room. Catherine stirred as he gently touched her arm. "Jake," she mumbled sleepily, "what time is it?" "Mom, listen carefully," he whispered. "I need to move you. Can you walk a little if I help you?" Her confusion cleared slightly as she registered his urgency. "What's happening?" "I'll explain later. Right now, we need to leave." Supporting his weakened mother, Jake navigated service corridors toward the loading dock where deliveries arrived. According to the schedule he'd memorized, a medical supply truck would arrive at 2:30 a.m. They had almost reached the exit when alarms blared throughout the facility. Red emergency lights bathed the corridors as Montgomery's voice came over the intercom. "Security alert. Patient Catherine Collins is experiencing a severe reaction. All medical personnel report to Recovery Room 4 immediately." Jake quickened their pace, his mother leaning heavily against him. As they pushed through the final door to the loading area, bright lights suddenly flooded the space. Montgomery stood waiting, flanked by security personnel and medical staff. "Did you really think it would be so easy?" Montgomery asked, his voice almost sympathetic. "This facility has redundant security systems, Mr. Collins. Your little excursion was monitored from the moment you left your room." Jake positioned himself protectively in front of his mother. "You're experimenting on vulnerable patients, falsifying results, coercing participants. It ends now. And how exactly do you plan to stop it?" Montgomery stepped closer. "Your mother is coding as we speak, or would be if she weren't standing right here. By the time authorities would respond to any allegations, she could be in critical condition or worse." His smile was terrible in its confidence. "You have no leverage, no evidence that can't be explained away, and no options that don't end with your mother's deterioration." As Catherine swayed behind him, Jake made his final play. "You're wrong about the evidence." He reached into his pocket, retrieving the small recording device he'd carried since his first day. "Everything you've said, everything you've done, it's all documented, and it's already been transmitted beyond your reach." Montgomery's smile faltered for the first time. "You're bluffing." Before Jake could respond, Catherine collapsed behind him, her breathing suddenly labored, face contorted in pain. The hospital speakers announced an emergency. Patient Catherine Collins was having a severe reaction to the procedure, and all resident physicians were to report immediately to the ICU. "Code blue! Code blue!" The urgent announcement echoed through the facility as Catherine slumped against Jake, her face suddenly ashen. Medical staff rushed forward, no longer focused on restraining Jake, but on saving his mother's life. "Mom!" Jake shouted, medical training overriding every other instinct as he lowered her gently to the ground, fingers automatically finding her carotid pulse. Weak, irregular, but present. Montgomery pushed through the gathering staff. "Get her to the emergency suite, now!" As orderlies transferred Catherine onto a gurney, Jake refused to be separated from her, running alongside as they rushed through corridors. The monitoring equipment showed her oxygen levels plummeting, heart rhythm becoming erratic. "What's happening to her?" Jake demanded, his eyes fixed on the monitors. "Precisely what I warned you about," Montgomery replied tersely. "The incomplete treatment protocol is causing a systemic inflammatory response. Her body is attacking its own neural pathways." They burst into the emergency suite, a room Jake had only glimpsed during his restricted tours of the facility. Advanced equipment surrounded a central operating table, technology that made even the best hospitals look outdated. "We need to stabilize her before attempting any interventions," a resident physician announced, reaching for standard medications. "Those won't work," Jake interrupted, years of medical training crystallizing into sudden clarity. "The experimental compound has altered her immune response. Standard anti-inflammatories will accelerate the reaction, not suppress it." The medical team hesitated, looking to Montgomery for direction. The older doctor's face was unreadable behind his surgical mask as he observed Jake. "If not standard protocol, then what do you suggest, Mr. Collins?" Montgomery's voice held a note of challenge. Jake's mind raced through what he'd learned from the stolen files, from Emma's experiences, from everything he'd observed in Montgomery's facility. "We need naloxone to counter the neural binding properties, combined with a targeted corticosteroid delivery. Not systemic, direct application to affected neural clusters." Montgomery's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's an unconventional approach." "Your whole career is built on unconventional approaches," Jake shot back. "The difference is, I'm suggesting one that will actually help her, not advance your research agenda." The medical team watched the confrontation with tense silence. Finally, an older nurse named Helen stepped forward. "The young man is right," she stated firmly. "I've seen this reaction before. Standard protocols will fail. We need to try his approach." Montgomery's eyes narrowed at this unexpected alliance, but Catherine's monitors were screaming warnings that couldn't be ignored. "Fine. Proceed with Mr. Collins's suggestion. But if she deteriorates further, we immediately revert to established protocol." Jake worked with focused intensity, directing the preparation of medications, calculating dosages, all while monitoring his mother's failing systems. His hands moved with surprising steadiness despite the stakes, years of restaurant precision serving him well in medical crisis. "IV access established," Helen announced. "Ready for naloxone." "Administer 0.4 mg/" Jake instructed. "Follow immediately with the corticosteroid preparation." The minutes that followed were the longest of Jake's life. Catherine's vitals continued to worsen initially, the monitors displaying increasingly alarming data. Montgomery hovered at the edge of the team, his expression shifting between skepticism and reluctant interest. "Oxygen saturation still dropping," a resident reported. "BP 90-60 and falling." "Give it time," Jake insisted, his eyes fixed on the neural activity monitor. "The naloxone needs to displace the compound receptors before the corticosteroid can—" The monitor suddenly chimed as a pattern shifted. Then another. Catherine's breathing eased slightly, the harsh, rasping sounds softening. "Saturation improving. 89, 91, 93%, the resident called out, surprise evident in her voice. Jake allowed himself a moment of relief before continuing. "Increase oxygen flow to 6 liters. Prepare a second corticosteroid dose at half concentration for administration in 20 minutes. Over the next hour, Catherine's condition stabilized. Color returned to her face, her breathing regularized, and her neural patterns showed marked improvement. The emergency team gradually stepped back, their initial skepticism replaced by quiet respect. Montgomery had remained silent throughout the successful intervention. Now he approached Jake, speaking quietly enough that others couldn't hear. "Impressive work. You've genuinely surprised me, Mr. Collins." His tone was measured, difficult to read. Few physicians, let alone students, would have recognized that particular reaction pattern, much less known how to counteract it. "I had motivation you couldn't match," Jake replied coldly, "and access to files you thought were secure." Montgomery's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed. We'll discuss the considerable breach of confidentiality later. For now, your mother is stable, which is what we both wanted." As the emergency team transferred Catherine to recovery, Jake remained by her side, unwilling to trust her care to anyone else after what had happened. Helen stayed too, monitoring vitals and adjusting medication flows with experienced hands. "You've made an enemy today," she murmured when they were alone. "Montgomery doesn't like being shown up, especially not in front of his staff." "He was already my enemy," Jake replied, gently adjusting his mother's blanket. "At least now he knows I'm not helpless against him." Catherine's eyes fluttered open briefly, finding Jake's face before drifting closed again. Her hand squeezed his weakly, a gesture that meant more than any medical readout could convey. Outside the facility, Emma was mobilizing their contingency plan. After receiving Jake's final automated message, a distress signal triggered when his monitoring device detected medical emergency conditions. She had contacted Diane Marshall, an investigative reporter who specialized in medical ethics exposés. "The evidence is compelling," Diane acknowledged, reviewing the files Emma had shared securely. "But without corroboration, without access to actual patients or whistleblowers within the organization, it's his word against yours." "We have Jake inside," Emma insisted, "and others who might come forward if they saw a real chance to stop him." "Your uncle has powerful friends, Emma. Board positions at major hospitals, funding connections to universities, political donors." Diane tapped her pen against her notepad. "We need something indisputable, something he can't explain away or bury with legal threats." Meanwhile, Mike from La Maison Belle had been gathering his own form of evidence. Former restaurant employees who had witnessed Montgomery's behavior over years, servers who had overheard damning conversations during private dinners, even kitchen staff who had been instructed to accommodate bizarre dietary demands for research subjects dining with the doctor. "It's not medical evidence," Mike explained to Emma over coffee, "but it establishes a pattern of behavior. The man's been hiding in plain sight for years, using his reputation and money to shield himself from scrutiny." As these external forces gathered strength, Jake maintained his vigil at his mother's bedside. Montgomery had not returned since the emergency, but Jake could feel the foundation shifting around him. Staff whispered in corridors. Security protocols seemed less rigidly enforced. Something was changing. Catherine woke fully the following morning, her eyes clearer than they had been in months. "Jake?" Her voice was weak but steady. "What happened?" He explained as simply as he could, omitting the more frightening details. "You had a reaction to the treatment, but you're stable now, improving." She studied his face, maternal instinct cutting through her medical fog. "You're in trouble, aren't you? Because of me." "Not because of you," Jake corrected gently. "Because some people care more about advancement than healing. But that's going to change." A soft knock at the door preceded Montgomery's entrance. He looked immaculate as always, but something in his bearing had altered. A barely perceptible tension in his shoulders, a tightness around his eyes. "Mrs. Collins, I'm pleased to see you recovering." His smile was professional, practiced. "Your son implemented quite an innovative intervention. You should be very proud." Catherine's eyes narrowed slightly. "I've always been proud of Jake." Montgomery nodded, then addressed Jake directly. "The board has requested an emergency meeting this afternoon. Your presence is required." "I'm not leaving my mother," Jake stated firmly. "She'll receive exemplary care. Helen will personally oversee her recovery." Montgomery's voice lowered. "This isn't a request, Mr. Collins. It's an opportunity, perhaps the only one you'll get, to resolve our situation without further complications." After Montgomery left, Jake called Helen to the room. "Can I trust you to protect her if I go to this meeting?" The veteran nurse nodded solemnly. "No harm will come to her on my watch. And Jake." She glanced toward the door. "Something's happening. The board never convenes emergency sessions unless there's serious trouble." Jake squeezed his mother's hand reassuringly before preparing to face whatever Montgomery had planned. To his surprise, he found Emma waiting in an anteroom outside the board meeting. "How did you get in here?" he whispered, embracing her quickly. "Officially. I'm here as a patient advocate with concerns about my uncle's treatment protocols." Her smile was grim. "Unofficially, I'm making sure you don't face this alone." The boardroom doors opened, revealing an imposing table surrounded by serious-faced executives and medical directors. Montgomery sat at the head, his posture rigid, expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Collins," he began as Jake took the indicated seat. The board has received concerning information regarding our research protocols and patient consent procedures. Before we proceed further, I believe we should discuss privately what you hope to achieve here. Jake met his gaze steadily. Transparency, ethical oversight, and guarantees that my mother and every other patient in your care receives proper treatment without being used as unwitting research subjects. Montgomery's laugh held no humor. So righteous, so naive. Do you understand what real medical advancement requires? The paperwork, the delays, the bureaucracy that kills patients while waiting for approvals? I understand that using vulnerable people as test subjects without informed consent isn't advancement. It's exploitation. The board members shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. One older woman leaned forward. Dr. Montgomery, you assured us all research protocols met ethical standards. They do, in practical terms, Montgomery insisted. The technical requirements of informed consent sometimes limit life-saving interventions that you can publish and patent, Jake interrupted. Let's be honest about your priorities. The tension in the room thickened as Montgomery's face darkened. He seemed about to respond when the doors opened again. Diane Marshall entered, press credentials displayed prominently, followed by two official-looking individuals in suits. I apologize for the interruption, Diane announced, but these representatives from the Medical Ethics Board have some questions that can't wait. They've received substantial evidence regarding experimental procedures being conducted without proper oversight or patient consent. When Gerald returned from the meeting with the board, his face was pale. He looked at Jake with a mixture of respect and resentment. It seems you've won, Collins. The board just received anonymous evidence about my experimental protocols and wants to implement your proposal for ethical supervision. You have until tomorrow to tell me your terms. Jake entered the conference room with a thick folder of meticulously organized documents tucked under his arm. The weight of sleepless nights showed in the shadows beneath his eyes, but his posture remained straight, his gaze steady. Gerald Montgomery sat waiting at the polished oak table, fingers steepled before him, the picture of composed authority despite his recent defeat. Right on time, Mr. Collins, Montgomery said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I've always appreciated punctuality. Jake placed the folder on the table but remained standing. Before we begin, I want to see my mother. Your mother is resting comfortably. Her latest tests show remarkable improvement under the modified protocol you suggested. Montgomery's smile was thin, professional. You've proven your medical intuition. Now let's discuss your demands. Jake finally sat down, sliding the folder across the table. These aren't demands. They're terms for moving forward in a way that benefits everyone, including you. Montgomery raised an eyebrow as he opened the folder, scanning the first page with practiced indifference that slowly gave way to genuine surprise. Complete. Treatment protocol for my mother, Jake began, ticking off points on his fingers. A legitimate scholarship without experimental requirements. Implementation of a transparent ethics oversight committee for all research. And a comprehensive accessibility program for medical students and patients with disabilities. Accessibility program? Montgomery scoffed. That's hardly relevant to our situation. It's entirely relevant. Your treatment of Emma over the years, the barriers you've allowed to remain in place for patients with disabilities, they're symptoms of the same problem. Jake leaned forward. You see people as means to an end, not as individuals with dignity and rights. Montgomery laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Such idealism. Do you have any idea what these changes would cost? The delays they would cause in research timelines? The regulatory nightmares? I do, Jake replied calmly, pulling out detailed budgets and implementation schedules from the folder. I've calculated everything, including how your foundation could actually benefit from these changes through increased public trust, expanded funding opportunities, and better long-term patient outcomes. For a moment, Montgomery appeared genuinely taken aback by the thoroughness of Jake's preparation. He leafed through the documents with increasing focus, his expression unreadable. "You've been busy," he finally said. "I had motivation." Jake's voice remained steady. "The USB drive on the table contains everything. Every unauthorized experiment, every falsified result, every patient harm that was covered up. Copies are already with 3 different people." The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. Montgomery's eyes narrowed as he assessed Jake anew, seeing not just a desperate waiter or struggling student, but a formidable opponent who had successfully outmaneuvered him. "The board seems quite taken with your ethical oversight proposal," Montgomery admitted reluctantly. "They've suggested implementing it immediately given the concerns that have been raised." "I'm glad to hear it." Jake pointed to a specific section in the documents. "You'll notice I've included a transition plan that preserves your leadership position and research priorities, while simply adding necessary safeguards." "How considerate," Montgomery replied dryly. "And what makes you think I won't simply dismantle these changes once this current unpleasantness has passed?" Jake met his gaze directly. "Because the Oversight Committee will include external members from the Medical Ethics Board, and because you're smart enough to recognize when adaptation is preferable to extinction." The standoff stretched for several long seconds before Montgomery's posture subtly changed, tension releasing from his shoulders as he made his decision. "Your mother's treatment will continue as specified," he conceded. "The scholarship is yours without research participation requirements. The Ethics Committee," he grimaced slightly, "will be established according to these guidelines. As for this accessibility program, it's non-negotiable," Jake interrupted firmly. "Emma has already agreed to serve as consultant for implementation." At the mention of his niece, Montgomery's expression flickered with something complex, regret perhaps, or wounded pride. "Emma has considerable expertise to offer," he acknowledged quietly, "though I doubt she'll want to work directly with me." "She's willing to try if you are." Jake stood up. "Now, I'd like to see my mother." As they walked the corridors of the facility, Jake noted subtle changes already occurring. Staff members meeting his eyes with new respect, security personnel less intimidating in their stance, even patients more relaxed in common areas. Catherine was sitting up in bed when they arrived, color in her cheeks, alert in a way Jake hadn't seen in months. Helen stood nearby, reviewing medication charts with professional attention. "Jake," Catherine's face brightened. "Dr. Montgomery was just explaining the new treatment plan. They think I might be able to go home in a few weeks." "That's wonderful, Mom." Jake moved to her side, taking her hand while nodding appreciatively to Helen. "How are you feeling?" "Better than I have in ages." Her gaze shifted between Jake and Montgomery, sensing the changed dynamic. "Is everything resolved?" "We're making progress," Jake assured her. "Dr. Montgomery and I have reached an understanding that will benefit many patients." Montgomery cleared his throat. "Your son has illuminated some opportunities for improvement in our protocols. We'll be implementing changes based on his recommendations." Catherine's pride was evident as she squeezed Jake's hand. He was always good at finding better ways to do things, even as a child. 3 months later, Jake stood in the renovated entrance of La Maison Belle, surveying the newly installed wheelchair ramp and accessibility features with satisfaction. The restaurant had reopened under Mike's management after the previous manager's unethical relationship with Montgomery had been exposed. "Looks good, doesn't it?" Emma said, wheeling herself smoothly up the ramp to join him. "The contractors followed the specifications perfectly." "Better than good," Jake agreed. "It's just the beginning, though. The medical school modifications will be completed next month." The past 12 weeks had seen remarkable transformations. Catherine's health had stabilized, allowing her to return home with weekly monitoring. Jake had resumed his medical studies under the revised scholarship program, now with dedicated time allocated for his accessibility initiative work. Perhaps most surprising was Montgomery's gradual, if reluctant, adaptation to the new reality. After the initial shock of having his methods exposed and constrained, he had begun channeling his undeniable brilliance into research that maintained ethical boundaries while still pursuing innovation. "My uncle asked about you," Emma mentioned as they entered the restaurant. "He was reviewing your proposal for neural interface accommodations for mobility devices." "And?" Jake held the door for her. "He said it was unexpectedly insightful." Emma smiled. From him, that's practically a standing ovation. The restaurant staff greeted them warmly, leading them to a special table set aside for the evening's event, a fundraiser for the new accessibility scholarship at the medical school. Jake had organized it with Mike's enthusiastic support, inviting potential donors, medical educators, and most importantly, students with disabilities who had previously been discouraged from medical careers. As people began arriving, Jake circulated through the growing crowd, his waiter's instinct for attending to others serving him well in this new role. He spotted his mother chatting animatedly with Helen, who had left Montgomery's facility to work at a community clinic where Catherine now volunteered part-time. "You've made quite an impact in a short time," a familiar voice observed. Jake turned to find Montgomery standing behind him, impeccably dressed as always, but somehow less imposing than he had once seemed. "It's amazing what can happen when people work together instead of being exploited," Jake replied, his tone pointed but not hostile. Montgomery nodded slowly. "I've been reviewing the preliminary data from our new research protocols. The transparency has actually increased participation rates. Patients trust us more." "Imagine that." A brief smile touched Montgomery's lips. "Your clinical rotation evaluations are excellent, by the way. The attending physicians speak highly of your diagnostic skills." "Thank you." Jake accepted the compliment with a brief nod. "And the ethics committee?" "A constant thorn in my side," Montgomery admitted. "But a necessary one, I'm beginning to realize." He glanced around the restaurant at the diverse group of people gathered in support of Jake's initiative. "You've built something meaningful here, something I never considered important." Before Jake could respond, Emma approached, now accompanied by Samantha, whose recovery from Montgomery's experimental treatments had progressed well under the revised protocols. "The Dean of Admissions just arrived," Emma informed Jake. "He's ready to announce the first recipient of the Accessibility Scholarship." As Jake excused himself to join the presentation, he caught Montgomery watching the proceedings with an expression he couldn't quite define. Not quite regret, not quite pride, but something in between. The older doctor raised his glass slightly in Jake's direction, a silent acknowledgement that perhaps there were different kinds of medical progress than he had previously recognized. The evening concluded with unexpected success, donations exceeding their target, commitments from medical institutions to adopt similar accessibility initiatives, and most importantly, the faces of students who now saw paths opening where barriers had once stood. Later, as the restaurant emptied, Jake found himself at the bar where Mike was tallying the event receipts. "Not bad for a former waiter with a stained shirt," Mike grinned, sliding a coffee across the counter. Jake laughed. "From serving drinks to serving a cause." "Your dad would be proud," Mike said more seriously. "Catherine showed me his picture. Said he always believed medicine should help everyone, not just those who fit the system." Jake nodded, emotion tightening his throat momentarily. That's the goal. As he sipped his coffee, Jake noticed Montgomery still lingering at a corner table, reviewing documents with focused attention. 3 months ago, Jake had seen him as the enemy, an obstacle to overcome. Now, he recognized something more complex. A brilliant mind, capable of both tremendous harm and tremendous good, depending on the constraints and incentives surrounding him. "Jake," approached the table, coffee in hand. Long night? Montgomery looked up, fatigue evident in his eyes. Preparing for tomorrow's presentation to the board, your accessibility program's first quarterly review. And? The data supports expansion, Montgomery admitted. The costs are offset by unexpected benefits in patient outcomes and staff retention. Jake smiled. Good medicine is good business, when done right. Montgomery closed his folder and stood, gathering his coat. Your father once said something similar to me years ago. I didn't listen then. He paused, meeting Jake's eyes directly. Perhaps it's time I did. 3 months after that, Jake received a formal invitation to a special ceremony at the medical school. He would be the first recipient of the award for ethical excellence, an honor created specifically in response to recent events, and the host of the ceremony, surprisingly, would be Dr. Gerald Montgomery. Jake adjusted his tie for the third time, standing before the small mirror in the anteroom adjacent to the medical school's grand auditorium. His fingers, once so steady while balancing multiple plates at La Maison Belle, now trembled slightly with anticipation. You look fine, Emma said, approaching from behind. She reached up to straighten his already straight collar, a reassuring gesture more than a necessary adjustment. More than fine. Professional, distinguished even. Jake laughed nervously. Distinguished. 3 months ago, I was a waiter with a stained shirt about to be evicted. And now you're the first recipient of the Montgomery Foundation Award for Ethical Excellence in Medicine. Emma's eyes shone with pride. Life changes quickly sometimes. Through the door, they could hear the auditorium filling with people, faculty members in academic regalia, students in white coats, hospital administrators, journalists, and in the front row, Catherine Collins, looking healthier than she had in years, dressed in her finest outfit for her son's special day. I still can't quite believe he agreed to present the award himself, Jake murmured, thinking of Montgomery. I think that's part of his penance, Emma replied. Public acknowledgement that you changed things for the better. She checked her watch. 5 minutes, I should find my seat. Jake nodded, taking a deep breath as Emma left. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of transformation, not just for him, but for the entire medical community surrounding Montgomery's empire. The Ethics Oversight Committee had uncovered and addressed dozens of protocol violations. The accessibility program had already welcomed its first cohort of students with disabilities. Most surprisingly, Montgomery himself had gradually shifted from reluctant compliance to cautious advocacy for the reforms Jake had initiated. A gentle knock at the door preceded the entrance of a junior faculty member. They're ready for you, Mr. Collins. The auditorium fell silent as Jake walked onto the stage, the spotlight momentarily blinding him. As his eyes adjusted, he could make out his mother's beaming face, Mike and the restaurant staff occupying an entire row, Samantha sitting with other students who had been freed from Montgomery's experimental protocols, and Helen representing the nurses who had helped expose the unethical practices. University President Davis spoke first, outlining the circumstances that had led to the creation of the award, carefully avoiding specific accusations while emphasizing the importance of ethical vigilance in medical advancement. Then, with formal gravity, he introduced Dr. Gerald Montgomery. Montgomery approached the podium with his characteristic grace, impeccably dressed, his white hair gleaming under the stage lights. But something had changed in his bearing, a subtle humility that hadn't existed before, a slight softening around the eyes. Medicine has always existed in the tension between innovation and caution, Montgomery began, his resonant voice filling the hall. Between pushing boundaries and maintaining ethical standards. Throughout my career, I have emphasized the former, believing that breakthrough advancements justify certain methodological flexibilities. A murmur passed through the audience. Montgomery had never before publicly acknowledged his controversial approaches. I was wrong, he continued, surprising everyone. not in pursuing innovation, but in believing it required sacrificing ethics. The past months have demonstrated something remarkable, that proper oversight, transparent protocols, and genuine informed consent actually enhance research outcomes rather than impeding them. Montgomery turned slightly toward Jake, his expression contemplative. It took someone outside our system to illuminate this truth, someone who witnessed vulnerability firsthand, who chose compassion over advancement, integrity over opportunity. He gestured for Jake to join him at the podium. The award we present today isn't merely for exposing problems, but for creating solutions. Mr. Collins could have simply torn down what he found objectionable. Instead, he built something better in its place. Jake accepted the Crystal Award, a stylized representation of the medical caduceus wrapped in a protective circle. The auditorium erupted in applause, led by Catherine Collins, who had risen to her feet despite her lingering weakness. Thank you, Jake began when the applause finally subsided. This recognition means a great deal, but it represents a beginning, not an end. The work of ensuring ethical, accessible medicine continues every day, in every decision we make as healthcare providers. He spoke briefly about the accessibility initiatives already implemented, the ethics reforms now standardized across the Montgomery Foundation's considerable reach, and the scholarship program for disadvantaged students that had been established with funds previously allocated to Montgomery's secret experiments. Medicine, at its core, is about service, Jake concluded. Something I learned not in classrooms, but as a waiter, observing human dignity in moments of both strength and vulnerability, recognizing that how we treat people matters as much as the technical aspects of care we provide. The ceremony transitioned into a reception, where Jake found himself surrounded by well-wishers, including several department chairs offering research opportunities and clinical rotations. Throughout it all, he kept his mother close by, watching with satisfaction as color remained in her cheeks, her breathing easy and natural under the modified treatment protocol he had helped develop. Your father would be so proud, Catherine whispered during a quiet moment, not just of the award, but of the man you've become. As the crowd thinned, Jake spotted Montgomery standing alone by a window, gazing out at the medical campus that bore his name on several buildings. Dr. Montgomery, Jake acknowledged, approaching cautiously. Mr. Collins. Montgomery turned, swirling the mineral water in his glass. Congratulations again. Your speech was insightful. Thank you for presenting the award. I know that couldn't have been easy. Montgomery's smile was wry. Considerably less difficult than facing federal investigations and class action lawsuits, which would have been the alternative without your discretion in how evidence was presented. Indeed, Jake had carefully ensured that Montgomery's surrender came with the opportunity for redemption, a choice Emma had initially questioned, given her uncle's years of exploitation. The reforms are holding? Jake asked. More than holding, expanding. Montgomery set down his glass. The board has approved implementation across all affiliated institutions, and 3 competing research hospitals have inquired about adopting our new ethical framework. That's excellent news. Montgomery hesitated, then spoke more quietly. I've been reviewing your mother's latest test. Results. The modified protocol has exceeded expectations. She's experiencing neural regeneration we hadn't previously documented. I've noticed her improvement, Jake nodded. The tremors have almost disappeared. There's a possibility the approach you developed might have broader applications. With proper testing, ethical oversight, and legitimate consent processes, of course. Montgomery added the last part with a hint of ironic self-awareness. I'd be interested in collaborating on that research, Jake offered. 6 months later, Jake stood in the doorway of a modest storefront in his old neighborhood, watching as Emma directed the installation of equipment in what would soon be a community clinic. The sign painter was just finishing the lettering on the front window. Collins Wilson Accessible Care Clinic. "What do you think?" Emma asked, wheeling herself to his side. "Will it work?" Jake surveyed the space. Examination rooms designed with accessibility in mind. A waiting area with accommodations for various needs, and a small but well-equipped treatment center. It's perfect. The clinic represented the culmination of their shared vision, bringing quality healthcare to an underserved community, while creating practical training opportunities for medical students with disabilities. Montgomery had reluctantly agreed to supervise the medical protocols, part of his ongoing rehabilitation in the medical community's eyes. Mike arrived with the restaurant staff, carrying trays of food for the pre-opening celebration. "The catering is on the house," he announced. "La Maison Belle's contribution to the neighborhood." The small gathering included Catherine, now working part-time as the clinic's intake coordinator, Helen supervising nursing protocols, and Samantha, who had switched her specialty to rehabilitation medicine and volunteered weekly at the clinic. To everyone's surprise, Montgomery himself appeared at the doorway, carrying a small package wrapped in simple, brown paper. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, his customary confidence muted in this setting so far from his usual domain. "Not at all," Jake welcomed him, genuinely pleased by his presence. "We're just celebrating before tomorrow's official opening." Montgomery handed Jake the package. "A clinic warming gift, if you will." Inside was a vintage medical bag, beautifully maintained, with the initials TC embossed on the leather. "It belonged to your father," Montgomery explained quietly. "Thomas Collins was briefly under my supervision during his residency, before we disagreed on certain approaches to patient care. He left this behind when he transferred programs. I should have returned it years ago." Jake ran his fingers over his father's initials, emotion tightening his throat. "Thank you." The evening progressed with warm conversation and planning for the clinic's future. As things wound down, Jake found himself serving coffee to the remaining guests, falling naturally into his old waiter's habits of anticipating needs before they were voiced. When he reached Montgomery, the older doctor accepted the cup with an appreciative nod. "You know, despite everything, you'd have made an excellent neurosurgeon under my original program." "Perhaps," Jake acknowledged, "but I've discovered I'm more interested in accessible primary care than specialized surgery." Montgomery sipped his coffee, contemplative. "Different paths to serving humanity." "Exactly," Jake smiled, remembering his days balancing trays and diffusing difficult customer situations. "You know what's the difference between a good waiter and a good doctor? They both serve people, but only one charges for the experience."